Welcome to Dropping Pebbles in the Pond. And tech willing, which I have to say is a pretty big ask right now, we're live on a variety of platforms. So wherever you're watching, and whether you're watching live or watching the recording, you're really welcome. Now, for your information, it's easier for us to see your comments in real time so that we can interact with you in more of a conversational way if you're watching on YouTube. So head on over there right now for a better experience while I just invite people to settle in. So as usual, I invite you to grab a brew or your favorite tipple. I've got one of my tipples here for me because I'll need a bit of a blurb during the show, I expect. But also grab a notebook, because not only do I have a few questions for you to reflect on and share your thoughts about, but I also have a very special guest joining me a little later on, and I know you'll want to make some notes. So settle in, make yourself comfortable for the next 45 minutes or so. Now, I'm always interested to know where you're joining from, so do let us know which part of the world you're currently in, or as my dear friend Mary Alice says, where your feet currently hit the ground. And Mary Alice is a name that we'll hear a little bit later on in today's show as well. So let's see if we can break our record of the number of places people are joining from. I'll pop back into the comments to see where we're connecting with today in a little while. As ever, I'm being supported, or held together is the truth, behind the scenes by my brilliant team, and they will share comments and questions as they become relevant. Why? Because I don't always remember to look. So they help me out on so many different levels, including sharing what I need to see when I need to see it. So let's think about the title of this episode. And if ever an episode title seemed apt, it's this one: Flourishing Amid Chaos. Now, for me, that sounded like an oxymoron, but I can assure you that it's not. You see, flourishing and chaos are not opposites, even though they might on the surface appear that way. In fact, they can have quite a symbiotic relationship, and there are a few caveats which we'll get to later on, I'm sure. Now, as introverts, it's probably true, okay, well, in my case, it's true anyway, that flourishing used to conjure up images of being calm and in control and kind of everything being well with the world. But you know what? I get a bit bored with too much of that. And that might surprise you to hear me say that, because I feel alive when I'm experiencing the fullest range of emotions. And they don't all get a chance to show up when I'm calm and in control and have everything sorted. So here's a perspective, my perspective, not the perspective, but a perspective, and my starting point for today's show. Think of it like this: chaos is the environment, the external conditions that we're living in. Flourishing is a response, and a very intentional one. I could choose panic or fear, but neither of those help me or those in my sphere of influence. So for me, when there's chaos around me, choosing flourishing makes much more sense. And if you're wondering how we might choose our responses, make sure to ask that during the conversation, and we'll answer if that's something that you're not yet familiar with. Now, I couldn't possibly explore this topic and do it justice on my own. So I've invited along the best person I know right now to talk with us about how to flourish in these chaotic times. I met her a couple of years ago now in a networking environment, and she left a very big impression on me. And I think she'll leave a big impression on you too. She's a leadership transformation consultant, and the founder of #ProjectMe. Her work focuses on leading within complexity, constant change, and chaos. So, where we are right now. I know the quality of this conversation, even though it doesn't have a predetermined shape, is going to be remarkable, because that's what happens when two change agents chew the cud together. So before we welcome my guests, let's just see where people are joining from this episode. Let's see where people are. So what have we got coming up? Australia. Yeah, brilliant. Melbourne. Yeah. Also Australia. Okay. Temporarily. Okay. Or is that... No, Estonia temporarily. Brilliant. Thank you. See, some of them are too small for me to read. High-tech mother, you're supposed to be sleeping because it's cold, but thank you for joining us. I know you intended to sleep early. Melbourne 2 with my annoying husband. Can I just check which one's the annoying one? And of course, I'm here in the not so sunny, getting chillier, Blighty. So, as I was saying, the quality of this conversation is going to be remarkable, even though we doesn't have a completely defined shape. And in order that we have that conversation, please join me in welcoming to this episode of Dropping Pebbles in the Pond, Laura. A quick round of applause. So, Laura, I've shared just a little bit about you, but please tell our audience more of your story so we can then get into exploring why Project Me. So let's just do some background stuff first, then we'll get into the big meaty stuff. Oh, we can't hear you.
Hold on. Can you hear me now?
We can.
We did talk about tech problems. But there we go. Tech problem number one. Where to start? I mean, wow, sensitivity is power. I just have to say that from sort of like the entrance to this conversation. And we can flourish amidst chaos. So putting that to one side, because it just echoes everything that I believe in. So who am I? I always struggle with this question because I believe that I am just somebody who is like everybody else. I don't believe in titles. I don't, because I think we live up to titles as a result of having a title, and then we try to conform and then wonder why we don't conform, and then we struggle. But if we want to go the route that says, I'm Laura Toop, I am the founder of Project Me, which is about us reclaiming our personal agency. I am also the founder of Together as Allies, which is born out of Project Me, which is about how we bring our understanding, and you talked about sensitivity as power in your opening, and that's what it's about, is that emotional insight and how we can turn that into something that is really powerful for sustainable change. And so for me, that's kind of the next stage, which beautifully aligns with what you're all about.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether that's, I mean, the one thing that I will tell you though, Joanna, is like, as you know, and my father's favorite phrase was always, Laura, why do you use 10 words when one would be? That's my curly whirly brain. So I give you the heads up from the top of the hour that unfortunately that's my curly whirly brain.
And one of the things that we need to get to is you being able to talk about your curly whirly brain without apologizing, Laura. Because there's no unfortunately about it. We are all neurodiverse. We're not all neurodivergent, but we're all neurodiverse. and I welcome your curly whirly brain into my little studio here. So you're very welcome.
And if you're my youngest niece, she says that's why my hair's curly. Auntie Lollipops, you have a curly whirly brain, and that's why your hair is so curly, she says.
So that's interesting. I didn't have curly hair as a youngster, and it's getting curlier kind of with age and etc. So maybe my brain's getting more curly whirly the older I get. That's an interesting thought, isn't it? Yeah. So as we start to dig in, I want to, I suppose, do a bit of a pre-frame about what we're talking about here, because I know that one of your positions around the work you do is that you say very clearly that traditional leadership models are insufficient for these times. So I want to kind of have that as the backdrop almost for our conversation, so that when we're talking about times of chaos, we're also acknowledging that, God, things need to be really different. We can't rely on those old times, you know, the old models that we used to stick to. And where I want to start is that, given that we know introverts are naturally overstimulated, you know, all the functional neuroimaging studies show that our brains light up differently to those of extroverts, and that the reason we don't need people around to recharge and stimulate us is because we're already overstimulated. And in my experience, in times of chaos, that can quickly tip us over the edge because we're already overstimulated. Now there's all this going on around us. And when I've been in those types of situations, fortunately, I'm not in them as often these days. What I've typically done is retreated further, kind of, I've closed down, I've retreated into myself, meaning that my voice and opinion is even less likely to be heard. So given that we know the traditional models don't work, how do we acknowledge the reality of us being overstimulated in these times of chaos and make it more likely that we can be heard and that it's okay for us to share our views?
Joanna, you've used the critical word, acknowledge. And I wrote an article many years ago, it's about 4 or 5 years ago now, that said acknowledgement is the medicine. And because it is the piece that says, this is the grounding, this is us putting like the stick in the ground, that means that we are not drawn into the noise. That means that we know where we're coming from, where we know where we're standing, we know what we stand for. That it's a bit like the stabilizers on a bike. I describe it often as, you know, you're in a dinghy on the high seas, and you're strapped to all of these other dinghies who are pulling you all over the place. And like, unless you put your, I mean, I'm sure some seafaring person will tell me that this is not how it works, but you know, let's just go with the metaphor. But if you don't put your anchor down first, then you're going to be drawn all over the place, and you were just caught in the noise. You're caught in that hurricane around you. And I think that is, for me, where I talk about our brand me. And our brand me is, in essence, the roots of a tree, the depth and breadth of the tree. So if we understand who we are, what matters most to us, and what we want to feel or notice, so those are the 3 brand me questions. If we understand those, that is our roots, breadth and depth.
Yeah.
If we understand those, it doesn't matter how introverted, extroverted we are grounded in the moment. We have anchored our dinghy. We're not going to get drawn into all of the other people's dinghies, you know, the relationships, the work, and all this other stuff. We're grounded in ourselves. And that is the point at which we gain confidence, because we go, this matters to us. This is what we are about.
Yeah.
And there is a beautiful phrase, and there's one that goes along the lines of, you know, you have to put your oxygen mask on first. And I say that one passes me by. But the one I love beautifully, because I think it epitomizes exactly what this is about, which is our heart has to pump first before we can supply our vital organs. So, i.e., we have to look after ourselves first before we can look after others. And that goes back to my analogy about the roots of a tree, in that we have to ensure that our roots of our tree, ourselves, are grounded, strong and deep. Because look at the sycamore gap, tree, which somebody went and horrifically cut down, but yet now is showing saplings, and it's like, what is that about? And it's just like, that is flourishing. That is, doesn't matter what has happened in the world, because the strength is within ourselves. We just haven't been taught that.
Wow, I want to kind of hang on to that point for a little while and explore that, because you're absolutely right. The nation was devastated when the sycamore gap tree was cut down. I know that, as was I, actually, for a tree I'd actually never seen in person. I'd never actually been there, and yet it held such significance. And you're right, because the roots were deep and secure, it has been able to start flourishing again. So it didn't just give up because somebody had cut it down. And that's such a big metaphor, isn't it, for what we need to be, that we need to be thinking about, is that something may come and take us out at the knees, or try to, but it's almost like then I have a choice actually about whether I allow that to fell me for good, or whether I maybe stay dormant for a little while, recover my kind of composure and my energy, and then start to shoot again. So I think that's such a beautiful and powerful metaphor for this.
And I totally agree with you, Joanna. I mean, my story, and maybe, if you go and Google my name, you'll probably find it. But, the reality is, as my story goes, 10 years ago, my world spectacularly imploded. My husband died. I lost my health, and I lost my career in about 6 to 8 weeks. My then 4-year-old nephew said, "Auntie Lollipops," aka me. Now that Uncle Chris is dead, very matter of fact, straight for the jugular, like a 4-year-old would do, because it doesn't mean it. You have nothing, he says. And that's fine. He was going to look after me for 100 days. But, at 41, 100 days is not very long, and that wasn't going to get me past pretty much March.
Yeah.
But I think it's, I share it because nothing became the basis on which I rebuilt what I have now, and a recognition of that we needed different. Because, much like you describing earlier, John, about we as children have a narrative set up for us, because there's a blueprint in school that is set in play between 7 and 12 age, that is, that the rules of the game are like this: follow the teacher, aka leader, follow sequential steps 1 to 10, and miraculously, gold star, amazing, your success is yours, brilliant, amazing. And then everybody else goes, but what happens when 1 to 10 isn't the way that it goes, aka my life? And what if success doesn't look like that? And the pandemic pretty much showed us that narrative doesn't work. But unfortunately, the blueprint is already set, because it's well documented that by the age of 12, pretty much our subconscious blueprint is set by school. So it's no wonder that everybody went into this place. And so I think, we're into this space of an added layer of chaos to to the world that we're already trying to experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to pick up on the kind of leadership point, what that means is we do need, I think, more compassionate leadership. We need kinder leadership. And because today is World Kindness Day, I understand.
Oh, right. I didn't realize that.
Well, and I released a podcast overnight that talked about the importance of kindness in leadership. I didn't know it was World Kindness Day either. What a wonderful coincidence. But I think what we do need is leadership that is much kinder, and that isn't the same as nice.
No.
Because the book I was reading was really clear, and in a very quick way, what it said is, nice is what people want to hear, kind is what people need to hear. And in thinking about how we enable introverts to express themselves when there's chaos and when they're potentially overwhelmed and maybe need even more time to gather their thoughts, what they need is a leader who is kind. They need teammates who are kind and give them space. And I think it's as simple as, in a way.
It is as simple as that, Joanna. But actually, we talk about it being simple, but actually, it's actually quite hard. I was at a National Rail Safeguarding Conference earlier this year, and somebody used the phrase, Lindley Gooden said, we all need to build better ears. And I think that just sums it up beautifully, because it's not about stepping into the space going, I can save you, I can fix you, because no one needs fixing. It is genuinely, we need to step in the space and go, I am ready to hear what you have to say. And I think that is what the world is right now missing. And I think it goes back to your earlier points when you opened the show about control in the calm, and how do we hold on to that? How do we take control in an uncontrollable world? Well, the only thing we can control is ourselves.
Absolutely.
But back to my roots of the tree example, and I've just seen a thing pop up there about we're too busy fixing. That is the problem. We are too busy fixing. But actually, we're fixing the right problem. So it's that thing of I just even earlier today I had a conversation with somebody and said, okay, that's brilliant. We all want to go into action mode, but actually this is where we go, okay, we're taking the right actions, because we could build a skyscraper, but actually a bungalow would do.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lovely phrase, isn't there, in project management about, you have to understand the problem to be fixing the right problem. And the problem with fixing is we're often fixing the presenting issue, not the root cause of the problem. And I think that's important too.
Exactly.
I want to move on just to explore something, because it became very apparent to me, I suppose. And whilst I'm not a huge fan, there is something that Tony Robbins said some time ago that I do believe in, because I've experienced it, which is that his assertion that our basic human needs, of which he says there are 6, include both variety and stability. And so there's something that I'm quite curious about in these chaotic times, whether those who have more of a need for variety fare better in chaotic times than perhaps those who crave stability. And I'm one of those who actually prefers variety over stability. So I'm kind of curious to really understand, how do we enable both those that need the stability and the variety to fare well or flourish or thrive, whatever term we want to use, in these chaotic times?
So, and I'm totally with you. I have a wholehearted belief, and it goes back to my sycamore tree example, if I'm honest, that I think the two coexist. I don't think you have one to the expense of the other. They, of course, it's a bit of a balancing act. One will have a slightly bigger draw versus the other one at any particular point in time. But there's an anchor between the two, much as I had just described. So I don't think the goal here is to remove the chaos. If you think of the eye of a storm in the middle of a hurricane, there is still this moment of peace and calm right in the middle of it. And I guess that's probably what we are, endeavoring to achieve. Hence why I say I think the two can coexist, but equally, that is why the acknowledgement piece that I talk about in the 3 A's is so important, because we're so quick to move to acting. Even at this event that I ran last weekend, and everyone was like, well, okay, so what's the action? And I'm just like, but we haven't fully understood what we're actually trying to act on. And therefore I could give you a spanner when actually what you want to do is hang up a picture, and then we haven't got the right tools for the job. So I think for me, it's understanding. It is stability can come, in many, many ways, and variety too. But if we are grounded in ourselves, like the roots of a tree, in the same way a tree can bend in any way that it wants to, that's the variety. That's our ability to be able to be ourselves in this world. And we can decide when we're going to flower. I mean, the environment, much as you talked about before, was sets the frame in many respects. So when I look at the leaves on the trees out here right now, and I'm like, well, I mean, it's a bit dark now, but earlier on when I was sitting here, it's like, I know there's still quite a lot of leaves on trees, which probably a few years back, because the weather's quite mild. But that's how we are managing the environment in which we find ourselves. I think that's so true for what we are describing as individuals.
And where that took me as you were talking about that, because I'm whilst I don't always display, I have a real love of language, and the etymology from Greek for the word chaos points to new potential that arises when a fertile disturbance happens. And isn't that a beautiful way of thinking about it, in terms of, chaos? At the moment, we're experiencing a lot of man-made chaos, but there's also just, chaos around us anyway. But if we choose to reframe that and see that as the potential for fertile disturbance, as opposed to, everything's gone to hell in a handcart, I think it makes quite a difference. But what I've realized for me is that all the while I can keep chaos out there and choose flourishing, which I have my own definition for anyway, or I use Dr. Lynn Soot's definition, then flourishing is always a choice for me. But when I allow chaos, when I internalize chaos and allow myself to be consumed by it so that I become the chaos, that's where things stop working for me.
I'm totally with you on that. And that's why I say about the anchoring, about the rootedness. When we are grounded, metaphorically, however we want to talk about it, when we're grounded in the very essence of who we are, what matters most to us, and what we want to notice and feel, as I say, what I call our brand me, that is the difference between us being uprooted and drawn into the storm, or us being grounded and being able to flex as a tree does, to be part of that. And you're right there in what you describe, and I'm, my curly whirly brain is gone curly whirly, definitely, because I sort of sit there thinking about all the things where we try to step into spaces that people tell us it should look like this, should look like that. And actually that's really hard to do. And I think this is where many people are struggling right now. I think in what you shared around how do we deal with it as introverts? I mean, we've had this conversation before where I'm actually quite extroverted, but I'm quite introverted.
Yeah.
And I get very exhausted by stepping into spaces where I know what needs to happen. But the thing that keeps me going is because I'm very grounded in myself, in my brand me, and knowing how I can step forward. But I do have to remember that occasionally. But I think I think it's important to remind people that just because I might be, and I think if I'm brutally honest, Joanna, it was you shining a light back on me that made me realize exactly how introverted I was, because most people would go, no, Laura, you're totally extroverted, because I remember the conversation that we had. And I just like that was just, it just shone a light on something I haven't seen before. Which was really powerful.
And if we kind of follow that brand me thread or route a little bit, I can see that when people are really grounded and sure of their roots, then they're less likely to be either drawn, sucked into the storm somehow, or seduced into it by thinking I should be over there, it's better over there. And I know that one of the things that we both share is enabling our clients to flourish, and that you focus on helping people reclaim their agency, which I imagine, and I might be preempting your answer, but I imagine that starts with, well, what are your roots? What is important to you? What is brand me? What's the difference between us, I suppose, is that I'm often working with people who have never experienced full agency, whereas you're helping people reclaim it. A lot of my clients have never had a taste of it. So I think our starting points are both the same in terms of understanding, well, who are you? What is important to you? What, how do you want to be grounded? And for you, then it's like, oh, hello, dear friend, old friend. And for me, it's like, oh, hello, stranger, I rather like you.
I think that's the beauty about it, though, Joanna, is that actually this is where I come back to this whole thing around we're more similar than we are different. And that I think it's through conversation that we realize this. And this is the beauty of all the world right now is like chaotic and divisive and not inclusive at all. I sit there going, this is the beauty of conversation. This is the beauty of what we can have if we just slow down and just had a conversation with one another. But yeah, I don't know. It's really, to your immediate question, it's really interesting because I didn't realize that I saw the world sort of back to front. Shall we say? Other than my sister keeps telling me, oh, you're definitely ADHD. And I'm like, well, at 53, I kind of, it's a bit late to be diagnosed for that. And you're like, it's not going to help me now. But I think it's, for me, it is in the listening. It is absolutely in the listening. It's just, and sometimes we have to give, and, I have been criticised in the past that, maybe I've shared more of my story than I should have. But I think sometimes it's in that sharing that people know and have the acknowledgement that they can go, it's okay. And that actually, even if they don't say it's okay in that moment, they will step away and, go, okay, well, I'm now digesting this and I will now come to the table with something different. But I think it's, I think the power is in all of ourselves, and recognizing, as you rightly said, Joanna, about reclaiming agency, because I genuinely think we have forgotten what we actually can do. And I'll give you an example. So, as you know, I did a Women's Voices event recently, and in that Women's Voices we had, our allies and everything else. But in the build up to that, we had gone out to a number of local youth groups to understand their voices. Now, there was one girl within that group who, at the leader's admission, had rarely said a word, was renowned for being really, really quiet. She wrote copious amounts of notes in the session. I wasn't in the session because I'd given the facilitation guide to the leader who's going to take the session. And she wrote one post-it note, because I believe in basic, because I think we get too complicated with like complex surveys and all the rest of it, that said, I have a voice and I have been heard. That was her one post-it note. It was actually her mother who came in the next week to the Girl Guides and Rangers group and said, oh my God, what did you do to my daughter? In a really amazing way. I mean, not in a negative way. She is so animated, so enthusiastic, so like, she has like come back to me and go, the thing that makes me feel unsafe is litter in my village, because she's only 15, this girl, rarely says boo to a ghost. Because if they don't care about litter, why would they care about me? Why would they look out for me? Why would they do that? So in that moment, she had recognized her agency. She realized what she could do to make herself feel safe, to then go, can we get the rest of the village on board? Can we do a village litter pick? Her biggest fear was, how do we maintain it? But that's fine, because that's how Project Me works. It's 3 A's and 6 baseline questions. If only I'd learned that, when I was about 6 years old. Shame it had to take me 50 years before I learned it, but there we go. That's what happens with 50 years of life. And she was so animated to the point that her mother went into the Girl Guides and Rangers lead for West Kent going, what did you do to my daughter? She's just like so animated. She's so enthusiastic about what she can do for herself and how that she can do and change stuff. And no, it's never going to be a policing issue, because, like I said, safety is a feeling. It's not just a rule of law. But here is somebody suddenly realizing what she is able to do for herself within the frame that she can control and influence. Hilariously, as I comment frequently to people, the obstacle is the way, i.e. we have no money. But here is somebody who, that ripple effect is huge.
And that's such a powerful example for me of when we feel heard, we feel more safe psychologically, which enables us to be bolder and braver and use that voice, even if it's one post-it initially, to say, and what is it you said? She said, I feel I've been heard.
I have a voice and I've been heard is what she wrote on her post-it.
It's fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. And so it's that type of leadership that we need to be encouraging, that enables people to feel safe so that they can use their voice, so that they can be heard, so that they can be bolder and live according to where their roots want to kind of really settle in the ground. I think we probably ought to get on to today's Pebble, because obviously I want to hear your view on the Pebble.
We'd still be here at 10 o'clock tonight, I think.
We probably would. And I would have no problem with that. And so today's Pebble, and I literally do have a Pebble, as always, that is symbolic for me in terms of when we drop that Pebble, it sends ripples out into the world in the same way that the work Laura did with the girl who now has a voice and is heard. So here's my Pebble. For me, I realized that the trick and the thing that has the most profound impact, and I've mentioned it already, but is to keep the chaos out there in the environment rather than allowing it to consume me. But that means I need to be aware of my meaning making process. And I was reminded of this just this week at a fabulous place, a fabulous workshop I attended in Ashridge. So I'm going to share it with you. So this is the time to get your pen and paper ready, because there are just 3 things I want you to think about. And then I've got a question for you after that. And Laura, I'd love your perspective on this. So my meaning making process is typically this. Firstly, I notice something. So I see or hear something that, that lands with me. The process is then I give that meaning. I imagine what it means, because I can only imagine. I don't know. So if someone kind of sighs in my presence, I notice it. What do I imagine it means? I could imagine it means they're bored with me. I could imagine it means they're tired. I could imagine it means they want to say something and don't quite know how to. Our imagination runs amok with what this means. But from that initial meaning making, I then feel something as a result of my imaginings. I might feel compassion if I've imagined this person is tired. I might feel right pissed off if I imagine that this person is bored in my presence. The feelings I can give, or the feelings I have, are only as a result of my imagination. And I read something yesterday, and I didn't write it down, I wished I had, but which is that feelings only last a matter of seconds. It's our thoughts around those feelings that keep them hanging around for longer. So that's our process. I notice something, I imagine what it means, I feel something as a result of my imagination. So understanding this process and being the observer of it, and this is where it gets clever. Being the observer of it is what enables me to have rather than be had by what I've made things mean, by the feelings. And that gives me greater choice and stops me from internalizing the chaos. So understanding that and being the observer is what makes me have those feelings rather than be had by them. So Laura, I would love your take on that if it's not too complex.
No, not at all, because you talk of observing and noticing. I talk of acknowledgement. And so I go back to the fact that I said, look, we can be in a space where unless we acknowledge, we could end up building a skyscraper, not a bungalow.
Absolutely.
But for me, feelings and the work I'm doing currently is all around using feelings as data points, as insight, as a means to be able to understand what we need to do next, because they are signals.
Yeah.
They are genuine signals. So when my husband died, I was angry. I'm going to, openly share that. I wasn't angry that he died per se. What I was angry about was more a case of the communication. So as a result of understanding and observing and noticing, as you described, what that was and what I call really going on, the acknowledgement stage. I don't accept that, because there's lots of words out there that says you have to accept. I don't accept that he died prematurely. I acknowledge he did because, this is the status quo. But to your point, I really acknowledged the feelings that I had, because that was my grounding. That was my signal that said, what was this anger really about? And it wasn't because I was really angry. The meaning behind it, as you rightly say, was because the communication hadn't been there. And so that was the story behind it. That was the noticing. That was the flipping of the script. That was the grounding. That was the bit that said, how do I take a step forward in this world that I hadn't asked for, had no map for, didn't recognize, no one else was walking it with me, but here I was, I still had to walk it anyway. And because of that, because of how you describe the noticing, the meaning, every single one of those is like putting a footprint on our hearts, telling us how we need to take a step forward.
Yeah. Gosh, that's beautiful. I had a question to ask, but I want to just sit with that thought for a moment, because it feels respectful just to sit with what you said about kind of the footprints on the heart in that moment. So I just want to, I want to sit with that. And I also want to ask, and this is for the audience, so another kind of pen and paper time, this is question time, is what meaning are you giving things that results in the chaos having you, as opposed to it being out there? And what is that costing you? What choices is it denying you? And I think that's another really important moment to sing the praises of Viktor Frankl's recommendation, which is that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space lies our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and freedom. So I think we need to consider what meaning we're giving things that mean the chaos has got us. And again, I'd love your perspective on that, Laura.
I totally agree. I am, whether I can remember all 7 right now, but I talk about the 7 P's of proactive choice. And and Frankl has got it absolutely right. In that space between, stimulus and response, there is a space, and we have a choice. And I think even if the choice is nothing, there is still a choice.
Yeah.
And so I talk about 7 P's, and I will endeavor to remember them all. But position, play, perseverance. I will give you the 7 P's. But the point is, for me, it's like, it's a proactive, and I call them proactive choice. And I think that's the point. It doesn't matter whether I can remember the 7 or not, because actually, ironically, they have been built up by the conversations that I've had with people saying, this is what's helped them in that space. So it's not me saying these are the 7 things because it worked for me. These are the 7 things that people have shared with me that has helped them keep moving forward. But it is proactive choice, because it is, to that point, it's choice. And as I started the segment with, it was, we have a choice, and that choice is, do we take it or do we not? Doing nothing is also a choice. And I think that's where so many people just want to say it's someone else's fault, someone else is going to do it, and yet we have lost our sense of agency, and then wonder why nothing's happening, nothing's changing. And I'm sitting in a lot of conversations right now where I'm just going, this is how you reclaim your voice, your agency. You don't have to be, and like I said, this event that I did recently wasn't about being loud voices. It really wasn't. You could have been the quietest mouse in the room. It was about understanding we all had a role to play, and the way it played out was, it looked like this, and I was merely there to be the bridge, to facilitate voices being heard in a way that was meaningful, that we could collectively come together. And that is the power, and helping people recognize that they had a choice. It didn't have to be like, I've got to be out there doing all this. It could be like this, really compact, really small, in a way that was relevant for them.
And sustainable. And sustainable. Absolutely.
Sustainable is key.
Yeah. And I know that the audience are going to want to know your 7 Ps. So
I will send you the 7 Ps form.
We're about to put on the screen a QR code that's going to take people to your website, Laura.
Okay.
So there's the QR code now. We'll leave it up there for a little bit for people to scan it. And that will take them to your website, where they'll find out more about #ProjectMe, about Brand Me, about your proactive Ps. So about your proactive
Ps, but I can't quite remember.
Yeah. And then there's a second QR code which takes people to your newsletter. So that one there that's up there now means that they can go straight and get to your newsletter. So tell us a little bit about what they'll find in your newsletter, just so that we know a bit about that before we sign off.
So I'm assuming you mean my Food for Thought newsletter, and that is, as the title suggests, food for thought. It's me challenging the, I suppose, if you want to call it, the norms of society, and questioning how we might think differently, and how we can see a different world, because we think differently. So the last one was all around patient participation groups, of which I am a chair for my local one within the NHS, talking about how actually through patient voices we can actually be the change that the NHS 10-year plan describes. So it genuinely is an extension of the idea that voices really matter, and you don't have to be the loudest in the room. You just have to find the space where somebody can elevate it for you. And that's in whether it's the policing work I do, whether it's the NHS work that I do, it is all about understanding, elevating and amplifying effectively the population voice to bring about better outcomes and experiences for everybody.
Well, on behalf of society, I thank you for what you're doing, Laura. And that does bring us to the close of today's show. And you've witnessed Laura and I kind of riffing about this topic of flourishing amid chaos. And flourishing is a choice we make day by day, moment by moment. It's not a destination. We don't get to flourishing. We choose flourishing. And it ensures, from my perspective, that I'm not subsumed or consumed by the chaos when I choose flourishing. And remember that chaos can spark creativity because of the unstable, dynamic and unpredictable conditions that we find ourselves in. So chaos doesn't stop flourishing. It simply removes the illusion that flourishing depends on perfect conditions, because it doesn't. Flourishing is a choice. So I'd love for people just to pop in the comments what the most important takeaway from our conversation was, because we are all work in progress. And over to you just for the last word, Laura.
I think I just go with your final comment. We are all a work in progress. We are all perfectly imperfect.
Yeah.
And we belong right where we are in our own skin.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me, and look forward to you joining us again in future. But thank you so much.